climbed the higher edifices of the town, fancying that they could discern the smoke and flames the enemy spread around them. As Windsor lay, to a great degree, in the line of march from the west, I removed my family to London, assigning the Tower for their sojourn, and joining Adrian acted as his lieutenant in the coming struggle. We employed only 2 days in our preparations, and made good use of them. Artillery and arms were collected. The remnants of such regiments as could be brought through many losses into any show of muster were put under arms, with that appearance of military discipline which might encourage our own party, and seem most formidable to the disorganized multitude of our enemies. Even music was not wanting. Banners floated in the air, and the shrill fife and loud trumpet breathed forth sounds of encouragement and victory. A practised ear might trace an undue faltering in the step of the soldiers, but this was not occasioned so much by fear of the adversary, as by disease, by sorrow, and by fatal prognostications, which often weighed most potently on the brave, and quelled the manly heart to abject subjection. Adrian led the troops. He was full of care. It was small relief to him that our discipline should gain us success in such a conflict. While plague still hovered to equalize the conqueror and the conquered, it was not victory that he desired, but bloodless peace. As we advanced we were met by bands of peasantry, whose almost naked condition, whose despair and horror told at once the fierce nature of the coming enemy. The senseless spirit of conquest and thirst of spoil blinded them, while with insane fury they deluged the country in ruin. The sight of the military restored hope to those who fled, and revenge took place of fear. They inspired the soldiers with the same sentiment. Languor was changed to ardour, the slow step converted to a speedy pace, while the hollow murmur of the multitude, inspired by one feeling, and that deadly, filled the air, drowning the clang of arms and sound of music. Adrian perceived the change, and feared that it would be difficult to prevent them from wreaking their utmost fury on the Irish. He rode through the lines, charging the officers to restrain the troops, exhorting the soldiers, restoring order, and quieting in some degree the violent agitation that swelled every bosom. We first came upon a few stragglers of the Irish at St. Albans. They retreated, and joining others of their companions, still fell back, till they reached the main body. Tidings of an armed and regular opposition recalled them to a sort of order. They made Buckingham their headquarters, and scouts were sent out to ascertain our situation. We remained for the night at Luton. In the morning a simultaneous movement caused us each to advance. It was early dawn, and the air, impregnated with freshest odour, seemed in idle mockery to play with our banners, and bore onwards towards the enemy the music of the bands, the neighings of the horses, and regular steps of the infantry. The first sound of martial instruments that came upon our undisciplined foe inspired surprise, not unmingled with dread. It spoke of other days of concord and order. It was associated with times when plague was not, and man lived beyond the shadow of imminent fate. The pause was momentary. Soon we heard their disorderly clamour, the barbarian shouts, the untimed step of thousands coming on in disarray. Their troops now came pouring on us from the open country or narrow lanes. A large extent of unenclosed fields lay between us. We advanced to the middle of this, and then made a halt. Being somewhat on superior ground, we could discern the space they covered. When their leaders perceived us drawn out in opposition, they also gave the word to halt, and endeavoured to form their men into some imitation of military discipline. The first ranks had muskets, some were mounted, but their arms were such as they had seized during their advance, their horses those they had taken from the peasantry. There was no uniformity, and little obedience, but their shouts and wild gestures showed the untamed spirit that inspired them. Our soldiers received the word, and advanced to quickest time, but in perfect order. Their uniform dresses, the gleam of their polished arms, their silence, and looks of sullen hate, were more appalling than the savage clamour of our innumerous foe. Thus coming nearer and nearer each other, the howls and shouts of the Irish increased. The English proceeded in obedience to their officers, until they came near enough to distinguish the faces of their enemies. The sight inspired them with fury. With one cry that rent heaven and was re-echoed by the furthest lines, they rushed on, They disdained the use of the bullet, but with fixed bayonet dashed among the opposing foe, while the ranks opening at intervals, the matchmen lighted the cannon, whose deafening roar and blinding smoke filled up the horror of the scene. I was beside Adrian. A moment before he had again given the word to halt, and had remained a few yards distant from us in deep meditation. He was forming swiftly his plan of action, to prevent the effusion of blood. The noise of cannon, the sudden rush of the troops and yell of the foe startled him. With flashing eyes he exclaimed, "Not one of these must perish!" and plunging the rowels into his horse's sides, he dashed between the conflicting bands. We, his staff, followed him to surround and protect him. Obeying his signal, however, we fell back somewhat. The soldiery, perceiving him, paused in their onset. He did not swerve from the bullets that passed near him, but rode immediately between the opposing lines. Silence succeeded to clamour. About 50 men lay on the ground dying or dead. Adrian raised his sword in act to speak.
"By whose command,"
he cried, addressing his own troops,
"do you advance? Who ordered your attack? Fall back. These misguided men shall not be slaughtered while I am your general. Sheath your weapons. These are your brothers. Commit not fratricide. Soon the plague will not leave one of you to glut your revenge upon. Will you be more pitiless than pestilence? As you honor me, as you worship God, in whose image those also are created, as your children and friends are dear to you, shed not a drop of precious human blood."
He spoke with outstretched hand and winning voice, and then turning to our invaders, with a severe brow he commanded them to lay down their arms.
"Do you think," he said, "that because we are wasted by plague you can overcome us? The plague is also among you, and when ye are vanquished by famine and disease, the ghosts of those you have murdered will arise to bid you not hope in death. Lay down your arms, barbarous and cruel men, men whose hands are stained with the blood of the innocent, whose souls are weighed down by the orphan's cry. We shall conquer, for the right is on our side. Already your cheeks are pale, the weapons fall from your nerveless grasp. Lay down your arms, fellow men, brethren. Pardon, succor, and brotherly love await your repentance. You are dear to us because you wear the frail shape of humanity. Each one among you will find a friend and host among these forces. Shall man be the enemy of man, while plague, the foe to all, even now is above us, triumphing in our butchery, more cruel than her own?"
Each army paused. On our side the soldiers grasped their arms firmly, and looked with stern glances on the foe. These had not thrown down their weapons, more from fear than the spirit of contest. They looked at each other, each wishing to follow some example given him, but they had no leader. Adrian threw himself from his horse, and approaching one of these just slain,
"He was a man," he cried, "and he is dead. Oh, quickly bind up the wounds of the fallen. Let not one die. Let not one more soul escape through your merciless gashes, to relate before the throne of God the tale of fratricide. Bind up their wounds. Restore them to their friends. Cast away the hearts of tigers that burn in your breasts. Throw down those tools of cruelty and hate. In this pause of exterminating destiny, let each man be brother, guardian, and stay to the other. Away with those blood-stained arms, and hasten some of you to bind up these wounds."
As he spoke he knelt on the ground, and raised in his arms a man from whose side the warm tide of life gushed. The poor wretch gasped, so still had either host become, that his moans were distantly heard, and every heart, late fiercely bent on universal massacre, now beat anxiously in hope and fear for the fate of this one man. Adrian tore off his military scarf and bound it round the sufferer. It was too late. The man heaved a deep sigh, his head fell back, his limbs lost their sustaining power. "He is dead," said Adrian, as the corpse fell from his arms on the ground, and he bowed his head in sorrow and awe. The fate of the world seemed bound up in the death of this single man. On either side the bands threw down their arms, even the veterans wept, and our party held out their hands to their foes, while a gush of love and deepest amity filled every heart. The two forces mingling, unarmed and hand in hand, talking only how each might assist the other, the adversaries conjoined, each repenting, the one side their former cruelty, the other their late violence, they obeyed the orders of the general to proceed towards London. Adrian was obliged to exert his utmost prudence, first to allay the discord, and then to provide for the multitude